So today we're talking about Cyborg Orochi. I know, some of you are thinking, wait, what? Orochi's dead, he's not even a cyborg. I know, but, we'll explain it. And I got my boy, Anime Anxiety, here with me, as always, with these One Punch Man collabs. What's up, buddy?
Yo.
So, also going to be going into webcomic spoiler stuff, too, but not too much of it, but just, be careful. I'm mainly going to be sticking to manga stuff, but we will touch on some webcomic stuff, but it's not too big of a deal, but I just want to put that out there. So, Cyborg Orochi. How do we get to this point? Well, let me explain. So, as we know, Saitama defeated Orochi with his serious squirt gun. And then he came back as a heart, which we didn't see what exactly led to that. But I guess, I don't know, he had like enough of him left, and maybe God played some part in it or whatever. Because we saw that, he played a part in bringing Sage Centipede to life. So maybe he had something to do with Orochi as well, coming back as that heart form. So he gained those absorption abilities. But then he eventually fused with Psychos, became, as I call it, Cyrochi. And then they went through that whole thing going against the S-Class heroes along with Tatsumaki, and it eventually got to the point of where Drive Knight showed up. He aided in the battle, and we saw that he fused with Genos temporarily to take on Cyrochi as well. And as this Cyrochi remnant was being taken care of, we saw Drive Knight take a piece, like a big hunk of Orochi, because that's what he was interested in. As soon as he saw him, he said that he needed like a cell sample, a specimen sample of him. So he grabbed him. Now he has a piece of Orochi, and then he dipped out of there. By the way, some people kind of like don't look too much into that, but it's like Drive Knight just left Genos for dead essentially after he got what he wanted. So now Drive Knight for sure has Orochi cell sample, and I think that is Chekhov's gun. Like, he's coming back 100%. And another reason why I think he's coming back is because of the mural. We saw that Orochi, once he got strong enough, instinctually he sought out more power, and he went deeper and deeper into the earth, trying to get to the core. But before he got to the core, he got to the bottom of the Monster Association, and he saw like this, implied to be thousands of year old, possibly mural on the wall that he mistakenly thought was depicting his resurrection, which, like, Orochi, that doesn't make sense. Like, you don't need to be resurrected. You're already alive. But, that's just for the convenience of the story. But once the rubble eroded more of the wall, we saw that it wasn't to resurrect Orochi, but it was to resurrect God. And that Orochi, or a monster of his power possibly, was needed, was like the main catalyst to bring God back, and you needed to place him on that altar. So that's where Cyborg Orochi comes into play, because as we've also talked about before, I'm pretty sure Drive Knight is like the leader of the organization. And we know that the organization are all about cyborgs and whatnot, and reverse engineering these monsters, as we've also seen recently in the webcomic too. So
right.
Do you see where I'm going with this, or did you put in
no, I definitely see like the line of logic here, because especially with the mural, because having that mural exist with Orochi, literally him, like spitting image of him on there, it has to mean something. It has to lead somewhere. And I feel like, especially since Orochi played a more minor role than many people probably thought he would at the beginning of the Monster Association arc, you kind of assumed he'd be like the big bad, and he gets one-shotted by Saitama, because everyone does, right? But you'd think that he'd him himself would play a more important role in that arc, but instead he kind of just fuses with Psychos and kind of just takes a back seat as the big bad for the rest of the series, or for the rest of the arc pretty much. So it makes sense that this is kind of setting up him playing a bigger role much later on, because I feel like he wouldn't be added to that mural if he wasn't gonna come into play with all the God stuff. Now it's possible that maybe the God's resurrection was thwarted by Saitama taking Orochi out, and it kind of undid what needed to happen for God to come back. But you still can't ignore the fact that in the text of the mural, it depends on like the translation that you get to where you read it, but essentially a worthy sacrifice needs to be placed on this mural and on this altar, and Orochi is the one that's literally on the mural. So to me, it seems most likely that he's going to come back in some form, especially since Drive Knight took some of his cell samples, and like you've kind of touched on briefly in the webcomic, we're kind of starting to see that these monsters are starting to be like cyborgified or engineered in a way with these cyborg modifications. So So it definitely opens the door to Orochi coming back in a more beefed up, cyborgified form.
Yeah, Drive Knight also kind of exposed himself also when he was talking to Sekengar and Genos after he had defeated Neon. He took Neon's burnt corpse. By the way, Neon's still out there. He's still alive.
Right.
He's going to be cyborgified as well. And he said that, it's like integral to humans to reverse engineer animals, and just make the best of them and their attributes and qualities, and then make them into machines or weapons, essentially. I'm paraphrasing. But I think that's also foreshadowing that he's going to do that with Orochi as well, because I'm sure he saw Orochi as like an apex predator or like an apex monster. So, I mean, his title was literally the Monster King. So, yeah, definitely interested in him. But like, we're going back to the mural, that has to come back into play. Like, God will be resurrected by Orochi going to the altar. Because one of the most important things, I think, is that it was specifically stated that Orochi instinctually goes to the center of the earth.
Right.
But more so instinctually kind of just searches out where that altar is. I mean, he's not aware of it. That's kind of like God's thing. He doesn't always tell you what's going on. Very select few does he actually make himself explicitly known to, but with Orochi, it's kind of like built into his iOS, built into his DNA, being like the apex monster, I suppose, to go to that altar. And I think that once he comes back as a cyborg, and we'll talk about what's going to happen at that point, it will eventually lead to him going to the altar again. And yes, the altar is buried under the Z City at this point, but that's not the end of it. So the other interesting thing that I think comes with Cyborg Orochi is that at this point, it seems like he is going to be Saitama's next big like arc ending fight. And I say that because nothing is really set up at this point after Cosmic Fear Garo. Just off the top of your head, like, besides God, like, who do you see as like, because Saitama always has to have like a big fight ending arc, right?
Yeah.
It's like the crux of the series. Like, and then it's like, do you think something has been set up? I mean, I can't really think of anything.
I mean, I only see two things being subtly set up in the webcomic right now, and that's Fuzzy, the guy that's the grandson of Shibabawa that inherited the third eye ability. He seems like, since he's kind of pulling the strings of the Neo heroes, it seems like he seems like a pretty worthy candidate, but also a more out there theory that doesn't really have a whole lot of legs to it. But we got to remember that when the machine gods attacked Kuseno's lab, Saitama was getting some of his battle data, or not battle, just data in general, kind of recorded as he was sleeping in that like incubation chamber type thing. And I think when he fought Machine God Mirror, he also like it's technically still recording battle data, because whoever it fights, it records that data, so I just feel like maybe there's a possibility that we'll be seeing like a cyborg Saitama or something, like come into play at some point, because it's kind of setting it up that way. Like, he's been getting this data collected. Maybe like they stole the data that Kuseno collected from the lab after it got destroyed. I don't know. That's just kind of speculation and stuff, but kind of like you're saying here, I feel like there's much more evidence that something like a cyborg Orochi or some kind of like new upgrade that Drive Knight gives himself with Orochi cells is kind of set up to be a more likely big bad, because I do also believe that Drive Knight is going to play a huge role towards the end of the series, especially in resurrecting God. So I think that's more of probably a more likely case to me.
Yeah, that's perfect. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's where I was going myself. That data that was collected by Saitama from Kuseno. Now, we don't know if it was all recorded. I don't think it was, because he slept in there, but he was awoken from like the stuff that was going on from the organization robots coming in and tearing the place up, killing Kuseno and whatnot. So it wasn't all recorded, and I think that's definitely going to come into play. Like, they only have 70% or whatever, but that's still plenty. And you said maybe there's going to be a cyborg Saitama or something like that, and that is very possible. But the way that I was thinking is that just put that into Orochi, and that's how he raises the stakes, because just base Orochi being turned into a cyborg, yeah, he's powerful and would probably be a worthy opponent for like somebody on Tatsumaki's level, but Saitama's still not so much. We need somebody to be like, at least stronger than Boros at this point. And I think that a buffed up cyborg Orochi with whatever data they're able to use that they stole from Kuseno, which also isn't confirmed. We don't know, because there was no robots that we saw surviving that. They were all implied to be destroyed after they killed Kuseno. know. But I do think for sure that data had to get out there, because what was the point of that sequence if it just goes nowhere, you know?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's either going to Cyborg Orochi or it's going to Drive Knight. But another thing that I think is going to Drive Knight, if it's not going to be Saitama's data that buffs him, I think it will be Genos' core. We're like fusing continuities here, but I do think it's all going to tie together, because Genos' future core that Saitama was able to keep after he defeated Cosmic Fear Garo coming from the future into the past, that's definitely coming back into play too, and I think Drive Knight is going to get his hands on that. Now, what could he do with that core? Well, technically, it does have, I guess, the recorded information of Garo like explaining energy manipulation and stuff like that to Saitama. Like, he teaches him how to go back in time. Now, we don't exactly see it. I mean, he kind of just, it's a real roundabout way that it happens, but I'm sure that that information can be used in some way to buff Drive Knight or just Cyborg Orochi. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I never thought of that, because you know, if Genos was able to kind of see everything that happened, pretty much like collect data from all that, then it'd be very easy for someone from the organization or DriveNet to do the same thing. You know, like getting that data of a god avatar would be super valuable in what they're doing, if they really are trying to create this super beefed up final, you know, big bad for the arc for Saitama, because you have the data that you collected from the lab, then you have the data that you get from the core that actually has someone with god influenced power actually fighting Saitama. So that's like super valuable information and data. So that might actually come back into play and be like the final piece that creates this, you know, conglomerate of data and different upgrades to this Orochi body. Maybe they like clone Orochi or something, and they are able to implement all these different pieces of data in that cloning. So he's just like this insanely strong monster. And I don't know, I think it makes, with you know, throwing that in there, it makes a lot more sense too, because there's just all these different little things that like you can kind of one can set it up to where all these different points in the manga was Saitama just kind of in a way aiding the organization or Drive Knight in creating this ultimate monster. And I think that'd be a pretty cool setup, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, you're putting it perfectly there, because it's not only Saitama, it's literally everyone that is aiding the organization, and they're just unaware of it. The Neo heroes have been aiding them by wearing the suits, giving them all the data, defeating the monsters that they implemented those chips with, so that it's just like a big symbiotic relationship that they've established. And then the Hero Association is helping Drive Knight, because they think that he's the most trustworthy and the most reliable, so they're giving him the information, but also allowing him to work there. He's, you know, in cahoots with Genos, still unaware, putting everything against Metal Knight. So yeah, everything, including Saitama, has been working for this one big goal behind the scenes.
I think on that note, actually, like, most importantly, I feel like narratively, it just makes a ton of sense, because I feel like right now the theme in the webcomic with the Neo Heroes arc is that, you know, all these cyborg upgrades, all these battle suits, like stuff to all this technology that's, you know, pretty much replacing experience and training for a lot of people, it still can't beat, you know, the regular guy. You know, Saitama represents like the regular guy to a lot of these people, like the Hero Named Victims Association. Like, they see like, this is a normal dude that got super strong, and he doesn't use all these upgrades or battle suits like, you know, all these other people are doing. So they're kind of like following him now, you know, like the weaker heroes. So I just feel like it would be a really great way to kind of wrap up that whole theme if, you know, at the end of the arc, it's Saitama versus some cyborgified monster that has all these upgrades and all these additions to him, and just, you know, kind of have obviously Saitama come out on top, and kind of have that be the lesson for the entire arc or something, that the human spirit, you know, comes above all, you know, Zhoniin stuff like that, the corny things like that.
Well, I mean, One Punch Man and One, they do it much better so that it's not, you know, as corny.
Right, yeah.
But yeah,
exactly.
the message is there. I think you're right for sure. That kind of has to come, because we see a lot of the S-Class heroes or just other heroes from the Hero Association leaving, because they're like, what's the point? I can just put a suit on, take some steroids, which they are giving them. They're giving them like drinks of steroids or something. So it's like, yeah, you know, just screw hard work and just trying to be natural. Just, you know, do all, you know, the suit and all that stuff. So yeah, I think the narrative will switch to that, and that will be the ending point. It probably won't be Saitama getting the credit, just like how he didn't get credit for defeating Cosmic Fear Garo.
Yeah.
They'll probably put it on blast again. That would be hilarious, but just somebody else. And then, yeah, that shifts us into the post Neo Heroes arc. But speaking of that, what's ultimately going to happen with this theoretical cyborg Orochi is he will be defeated by Saitama, but then I guess that's when he crawls to the altar or somehow makes his way to the altar, and then God is resurrected at that point, and then that takes us into the final long arc, which is like God comes back, and then we also talked about this before, his big final team comes into play at that point. So yeah, but that's pretty much it for this one, guys. Thank you again, Anime Anxiety, for coming along for this crazy hypothetical stuff that has little to go off of, but we know that it's there, so I do appreciate it.
Always glad to be here. Yep.
And everybody, please subscribe to Anime Anxiety on his main channel. He is now going full into One Punch Man, going hard on it.
Oh yeah.
And you're definitely going to need a place to go to for One Punch Man content, because I'm definitely not the channel. Lately, I've just been doing the chapter reviews, so if you're looking for that extra content, please check out his channel and subscribe.